I'm back again with even more pigeon stuff. I feel like I just opened a can of worms. I'm getting so many questions and so many thoughts and people telling me all these things they've heard. So I've got three more main points today that I would like to kind of break down. First one's a bit complex. Someone told me that they heard pigeon was bad for you because it causes in asymmetry in nutation, which is the sacrum moving forward, right, and counter nutation, which is the sacrum moving back, because of the asymmetry of the pose. So I'm assuming that's referring to one leg being in the back, right? We're talking about single pigeon, right? One leg being in the back, therefore an extension. The other leg being in the front, therefore in some degree of flexion, although there's a lot of external rotation as well. I'm assuming that's what it's referring to because in general, pigeon is a backbend, is it not? In fact, the only place I've ever seen pigeon in a kind of a floppy forward bend to get out of the back bend is recently, like, modern postural yoga. It's kind of a Western version of it. But if you look at any yoga book, yoga text, it's a back bend. In fact, this is single pigeon, right? Ekapada, Raja, Kapotasana, but Kapotasana, just pigeon, is just a back bend, and it's not an asymmetrical back bend at that. Anyway, so if the split leg position were really problematic, I'd be really concerned then, half the poses that we do in yoga would be problematic. Any lunge, the splits, Hanumanasana, dancer pose, and then other activities in general. Just what about like sprinting and hurdling, rock climbing? Those are like high force activities. And if we were worried about forces acting on the sacrum that maybe are asymmetrical, then running fast and hard, hurdling, things like that would be problematic. But we'd really have to do some research and see what kind of loads are being imparted on through the SI joint in a passive seated posture. It's just hard for me once you've studied a little bit of SI joint anatomy and you study its robustness and its shape and its evolution to transmit perpendicular forces across its surfaces. I just have a hard time worrying about that. I mean, just the nature of walking is going to be, split leg. So I just think it warrants further discussion. It could be right, but then it would have to be applied to a very large list of poses and activities. Those are my thoughts on that. The other one is that it's bad for the back hip because you're in maximum extension. Well, that's a problem too, because there's not a lot of extension in the back hip in general. That's about what we got. So once again, if you start looking at other yoga poses, the splits would be bad. Any standing lunge would be bad. I'm going to stand up, my head will get cut off, but that's okay. But just doing a lunge is end range, right? In fact, that's why we end up seeing lumbar extension in these poses, because we don't have that much hip extension. So in order to continue the shape of the pose, there needs to be some lumbar extension. So again, I just, especially when we're looking at the forward, when we're looking at the floppy forward one, this version, right? We're not even in extension really anymore because I've now tilted my pelvis forward. So it's kind of just neutral. So this, I don't see how the argument for this version holds water if you're talking about it being bad for the back hip. Maybe when you get to some other poses, but then back bends would be bad for you. Urdhva Dhanurasana. And then going back to the first argument, what about Urdhva Dhanurasana with one leg up, with one leg in flexion pointed up to the ceiling? All of these things would be so problematic. Like, why does poor pigeon get all the criticism? And then another argument is it's bad for the front hip because we're stretching things that should be strengthening. And I think we really have to pick that apart a little bit. Does stretching automatically destabilize structures? What would the parameters of stretching be? For the most part, the capsule's pretty resilient. Now, in extreme cases, of course, really high rate, high magnitude, but for the most part, doing a pose in a class that isn't like, as super aggressive for long periods of time and long duration, not just like single duration, but also just like, over years. It's a tough pill to swallow. As well as you have to think of the tissues around the posterior hip, of not just being the capsule and ligaments, but considering also the gluteal muscles. So you're very likely in a figure 4 stretch, whether it's pigeon or on your back, single pigeon on your back, there might be some tension across the posterior hip capsule, certainly, but you're also getting some tension across the gluteal fascia, and it's a 3-dimensional structure. Also, if that were really the case, if you shouldn't stretch this stuff, then why would that only apply in single pigeon? Wouldn't it be problematic here? Or wouldn't it be problematic in the currently so popular 90-90 stretch, where it's hard to believe that it's only bad for you in pigeon, but all the other versions, whether you're doing it actively or passively, are better. I just think a little criticism to the criticism is warranted. I like them all. I like them all for different reasons. I like them all for different people. It's always about context. And all of that said, I'll just demonstrate for you the way I personally like to do single pigeon, because I think it has a profound impact. I like to use a bolster, and I like to prop high enough to support the back hip because of that limited extension that we spoke about a few minutes ago. So if I'm high enough to support the back hip, then I can do I can be in the pose, and then I can do any arrangement of isometrics, of relaxation. I could use a chair and get some extension because the back hip is supported, so I'm not just hovering my whole body weight at this end range and getting tired and unable to support. Even then, though, I don't even know that for sure it would be a problem. I just think it does create some sensitivity in some people, and that's the last thing that we want to do. So yes, the front hip is supported, but I measure the height on the support of the back hip. So if you can see, I probably need a little bit more height, a little bit of a taller bolster, or a little extra blanket, because then I can actually relax, and then I can do all the isometric work that people love to do nowadays, which I'm totally all over. I think that's great. But every once in a while, a passive stretch feels lovely too. I hope that helps. Hopefully this is my last video. We'll see what comes back, and I'll just create more if I need to.